I like having that sense of completion and achievement. And so my view is the notion of burnout, which I don't really like as a word, is often really heavily misunderstood. I think that a lot of people think, okay, if you work this hard for this long, like eventually you're going to hit this wall. And I just don't believe that. I think that what leads to burnout is resentment.
Hi, I'm Joubin, operating partner at Kleiner Perkins, and I'm excited that you're tuning into Grit. The goal of this is not for it to be a highlight reel of how successful my guests are, rather a candid exploration of how hard it is, both personally and professionally, to create, build, and scale world-class organizations. If you're a fan of the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thanks. I was preparing for this over the weekend, and usually I like the prep, but I'll kind of go through articles and press and documents just to kind of get through it and look for things that I think might be interesting. In your case, I could not stop reading. It was fascinating. And I'll tell you why. I think part one is because your life story is epic, and you're epic. It's unbelievable what you've done. But number two, I don't know what the press's fascination with you is, but it is endless. I can't tell you how long these press stories are. And have you read any of them?
I have not read anyone.
No way, right?
I developed a view around 2008, so it's been a good 15 or more years now, where I decided it just didn't help me to read them. If I was viewed as really making good decisions in them, it made me less likely to revisit a decision, even if it was a bad one, and vice versa. And so I just decided, you know what? I have to kind of stay true to my thoughts, my team, the product, the company I'm working for, and not necessarily this interpretive lens from the outside. So I kind of have people give me the gist of what's going on in some of the articles and in some of the sort of themes that come up, but I try not to read them and certainly don't read them word for word. Yeah. And I appreciate, it's nice to be called epic, but I'm very much a work in progress and want to remain as such.
What do you mean?
Meaning we're all...
you don't, part of me talking about you in the past tense means that the best isn't yet to come or something?
I think there's a little bit of that, but I think there's always the notion that everyone's trying to do better and try and have a bigger impact every single day. And I don't want to feel like, I can rest on my laurels from yesterday.
And on the press piece, is it you worry that maybe you would lose some self-awareness if you become super influenced by other voices?
Well, I think that when you're making decisions about what products to launch, what companies to buy, things like that, the press necessarily takes an editorial lens. Is that a good decision? Is that a bad decision? Was that genius? Was that not genius? And if you start to blow with the wind in terms of the way that press is pushing you, it might have been a terrible decision. And it might make you less likely to revisit it because it was kind of anointed as a great decision. Similarly, you might have made the best strategic decision ever, but if everyone pans it, you might be like, you know what, gotta cut my losses here, can't overinvest in it, those types of things. And so a lot of times you just have to take the view of they have a lot less information than you do working inside of a company and working on the specific problem. And, you don't want to tune out what's constructive criticism if it's in fact constructive. But at the same time, you don't want to have it to have too loud of a voice because there was something in you that gave you the conviction to launch that product, to start that company, to buy that company. And you don't want that to get lost either in what could be a very surface level analysis of what's going on.
Yeah. If it's, for example, a decision that your team is involved in, they still might have more context than the press. Okay, if you're making a decision as the CEO of Yahoo or at Google, whatever, but ultimately they still don't have many of the pieces of the decision. Would that be fair to say?
That is right. But that's one of the reasons why it's important. You have to realize that, yes, your team is reading it. Your people in your company are reading it. So it's important to have the gist of it. But I also feel like when you start to look at comment boards, some of the snarkier publications out there, it's just not that constructive and it doesn't necessarily lead to better execution.
Yeah, totally fair. I wanted to maybe start with your lucky number, 12. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you talk about this?
Sure. On May 12th of 1987, I was about to turn 12 years old, and I reset the triple jump record at my school by, I think, almost like 1.5 feet, 21 inches or something like that. So I don't know if the record still stands today, but I was really good at the triple jump as a kid. And then I won the all-city math competition after school that day. So I had I felt like I had this big academic milestone, an intellectual milestone, and then an achievement, and I had this physical achievement. And so I was like, wow, like May 12th was just like the best day ever. And so May 12th became my lucky number. And then over the course of my life, on other May 12ths, good things happened. I signed my Google offer letter on May 12th. And, it's just been something that's kind of followed me around. And it's a little bit challenging because people always ask you a favorite number between 1 and 10, or pick a number between 1 and 10. Like mine is 12. But it's useful to have a lucky number or a favorite number. And so for me, my favorite number is 12. I also know this is really funny, but I love math. And I just like more heavily divisible numbers than I like, for example, like prime numbers. I think prime numbers are terrible, and I love heavily divisible numbers. And 12 is like this really wonderful heavily divisible number that's kind of still low. It has a lot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So anyway, that's why I like 12.
Do you ever count stairs when you're walking up them?
Sometimes.
Do you ever get to number 12 and think about it, register it?
No, but I will notice things like when I got assigned my dorm room at Stanford, it was room 312. And so I'm like, oh, like good omen, right? So like if I randomly see a 12 or things happen at like 12 or 12 o'clock, or even better, like 12:34, right? So anyway, I like 12, and then it was kind of happenstance. So I lucked out the year that I got married. 12/12 was a Saturday. And so then,
picked that day.
And so I was like, okay, it just worked out. I got married when I was 34 years old. Some people get married younger, some people get married older, some people don't get married. But I was like, wow, like of all the different years, like this year of all years, 12/12 is a Saturday. So I got married on 12/12 as well.
Oh my gosh. Can I ask you, just revisiting a comment that you made earlier about maybe not looking in the rear view and looking forward? It was around my comment of epic. It strikes me that you were the CEO and president of Yahoo and employee 20 or something, first female engineer at Google, 23 years old when you started there.
I think 24. Interviewed when I was 23, but
24.
my birthday was in the middle. Yeah.
And sorry, what was the number 12 that had to do with Google? That was your start
I signed
date?
the offer letter.
Signed the offer on the 12th.
Of May. Yeah.
For the last 5 years, you've been chipping away as the founder and CEO of a startup. By the way, you also happen to be on the boards of AT&T, Walmart, et cetera. But is that why you're doing it? Like, you don't have to go to a startup to work. If you love to work, which I hear you do, you could do work in a bunch of different ways. Why choose this?
Sure, I can talk about it in a couple of different ways. For various reasons, leaving Yahoo, I decided it was the right thing for me to start a company. I can talk about that. I also knew if I was going to start a company, I wanted it to be in consumer tech. And I also knew that it wasn't even just consumer tech. I like working on problems that affect everyone's everyday lives in small ways. So it may not be that, we get hours of your day to day, but we get minutes, or we save you minutes of your day to day, and we make you just overall a lot more efficient. For me, I really came to grok leaving Yahoo that it wasn't necessarily even about the role that I played. And it wasn't the role that I played, and it wasn't about necessarily even what I was working on, though I do love things in the consumer tech space that are very tangible and affect people on the everyday life. I like working on companies that change the world. And it's a very special privilege. And when we were trying to summarize Yahoo's impact as part of the sale to Verizon, I love numbers, as you can tell, having just kind of geeked out about the number 12. And we were looking at the number of marriages that had come from Yahoo Personals, the number of people who found jobs, the number of emails sent, searches done. And by the way, the numbers were just mind-blowingly big. And then someone said, there's all these numbers, and it's just really hard to capture. But there's a lot of successful companies. There's a lot of profitable companies. There's a lot of companies that are really prominent or capture the media's attention. But there's very few companies that change the way the world works and the way people spend their time and do things. And Yahoo is that. And I also realized in that moment, so is Google. And I really just love being a part of that. And I also feel like during my career has been defined by amazing entrepreneurs, many of whom have been funded here by Kleiner Perkins. And I really have great respect for the entrepreneurial endeavor and entrepreneurs in general. And I really found in myself, I like operating inside of companies. So I dabble in investing, but in my day-to-day, while I like to do a lot of different things, I like them all to be aligned along a certain mission and vision. And so that's why it made sense for me to start a company and start a particular company of Sunshine that would work on everyday tasks. And it's particularly everyday tasks that make AI much more tangible for people.
Give me an example of an everyday task.
Well, the common ones that I've worked on in the past are things like search, maps, mail, stock quotes,
as it relates to mundane, as it relates to Sunshine.
I would argue that those are all mundane, but I would say that for Sunshine, we want to work in an area that's often overlooked. So for us, it was really about events and groups. And then if you start to look at around it, what would make events and groups work better? Scheduling, better contact management, people actually getting the invite or the notice that, the soccer game's now at 3, not at 2, right? Figuring out, hey, everyone's free at Sunday at 4:00. Those types of things. We knew we would have to have a set of functionality there that helped people connect. And so we spent the first few years of Sunshine working on contacts, which is a classic everyday task. It's kind of funny. Everyone's contacts are a mess. And they've been a mess for so long that everyone just accepts it. But if your contacts weren't a mess, if they actually were dynamic and alive, and when people's contact data changed, they moved, they had a different way they preferred to get in touch with them, if they actually kept up, you'd stay in much better contact with people. We know today that about 19% of people's address books are stale. Wow. We learned that at Sunshine. So if you went into your phone and tried to call or email someone, about 1 out of 5 would not work when you went to use it. It's something that should be much better maintained. And if you had that, everything would work better. But on that same note, we knew that we were interested in events and groups. We also knew that we would be interested in things like photo sharing in support of events and groups. Mm-hmm. And that's what Shine, which we recently launched, is basically focused on group photo sharing. So we think it's too hard. If you want to take a great photo and share it with all your followers, Instagram's great for that. If you want to just text a photo to a friend, that works. But if you want to share photos with like 8 to 50 people, good luck. You're going to be split across iOS and Android. It's really hard to get everyone's contact information. This should just be a lot easier. It should not take a lot of time. And right now it's so hard, a lot of people just don't do it. If you go through your phone and actually see how many photos should you have sent that you didn't onto someone else, the number is actually usually pretty high, at least with the users that we're studying and talking to. So overall, just got really excited about that. And generally, I've loved photos, worked on Google image search in the early days. Orkut, one of the early social ventures at Google, really had a really strong photos following, and then obviously worked on Flickr when I was at Yahoo. And so have always had a real passion around photos, and especially how to have them as a real social communication.
It's almost like you're putting together different bits and pieces of your entire work experience.
Well, I think that the way to think of it is, I think one of the biggest problems today to work on, at least in the field of consumer tech, is how do we make it clear to people that AI can have a profound and positive impact on their lives in ways that they can really touch and feel it. And so I have all the confidence in the world in the giants working on the LLMs. We're going to have great LLMs. I also think the barrier to entry there is really high and really big. But I also think there's this fundamental issue that if you talk, right, I'm from Wisconsin, if you go and talk to people who are not that tech savvy, are not early adopters, and you ask them, how do you think AI is going to affect your life? I think the answers are profoundly negative. People are scared. They either don't care or they're worried. And if you started saying, well, but look, it could make this easier for you. It could do this. It could really help you. I think those are the kinds of magic moments that can really start to unlock for people what AI can do and make it much more tangible for them. So that's ultimately really what I'm working on.
Yeah.
And I also think that relationships are what make us all happy. And I think with a lot of these tools, a lot of times the technology gets in the way of relationships. And I think if you can have a tool that actually takes and makes those relationships stronger, especially using AI, I think that there's something really powerful there.
You were giving a talk at Stanford, and one of the questions asked about a list of characteristics that make you great. And your first answer, which struck me, was that you love working. Is it possible, given how hard you've worked for how long you've worked hard for, that now, as the founder and CEO of Sunshine, like, do you ever feel like you lose the edge? Is there any way to possibly be as determined as you were, just given your life circumstance now? I
never really felt it as determination. I just think I'm a fundamentally curious and driven person. I like having that sense of completion and achievement. And so my view is the notion of burnout, which I don't really like as a word, is often really heavily misunderstood. I think that a lot of people think, okay, if you work this hard for this long, like eventually you're going to hit this wall. And I just don't believe that. I think that what leads to burnout is resentment. And for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I didn't get 8 hours of sleep last night. I couldn't get home for a single night this week. I'm working this hard for the company and I'm doing all of this and I didn't even get this thing that I wanted. And that really breeds resentment and that starts to breed burnout over time. And so for me, I've always talked about it instead as not necessarily as balance, but as rhythm. If you know your rhythm, if you know what it is you need to stay really energized and not be resentful, it's funny because sometimes it can be quite capricious or maybe even superficial. But I think that if you know what it is that you want in that moment, you can't have everything you ever want, right? You can't say, look, I want to be gone for a year traveling the world and getting to see everything. But you can have a lot of what you want if you can figure out what matters to you. And so I kind of started developing this theory at around a time when I was at Google. I had a team that was working really intensely hard and I had a couple of people I was worried about, and it was kind of easier to go through it by example with them. But I had, for example, a soccer mom. I just talked to her this past weekend. Actually, now her kids are graduating from college, which Trippy. Is like, so it's been that long. But at the time, she was a soccer mom with little kids, and she was also running a team. She was the product manager for a team out of Bangalore. And so with 3 kids under the age of 5, she was taking calls at 1 a.m. And I was like, I'm really worried about you. You know, you're taking calls at 1 a.m. You got these 3 little kids at home. And she was like, I love my team. I have to pinch myself every day that I get to work on this product. Don't worry about me, but help me get to my kids' stuff. Because she's like, if I miss the soccer game or I'm the mom who walks in late to the recital, I'm just resentful for the whole rest of the week. It doesn't matter. She's like, I don't resent the 1 a.m. phone call. I resent the fact that I couldn't get to the 4:30 recital without looking like the person who prioritized it. And I said, okay, that actually helps me as your manager to know that. And it was actually stunning for me sitting in meetings, the number of times it would be like 3:45. And I would have gotten a note from Katie that morning saying like, I've got to be out of here at 4. And people would be like, oh, can you stay for 5 more minutes? Like we're almost there. And I'd be like, nope, Katie's got to go, right? And so it really actually helped me protect her and even in her own view, like really prevent burnout for that much longer. I had a new college grad who was in my associate product manager program, the APM program at Google, and noticed the same thing, long hours. And I said, worried about you. Don't you have to answer my question right now, but think about your rhythm. What is it that when you have to cancel it or skip it, makes you really resentful, makes you want to leave early for the rest of the week, not work that hard anymore? And he came back about a week later and he said, Tuesday night dinner. And I was like, what is Tuesday night dinner? And he was like, Tuesday night dinner, every week, my college draw mates and I get together and we have a potluck at somebody's apartment. And if I have to skip Tuesday night dinner, or even worse, if I have to cancel it when it's at my house or my apartment, I'm mad for the whole rest of the week. It was really kind of fascinating to see. And I was like, okay, great. Then you just know that about yourself. Don't ever cancel or miss Tuesday night dinner. Because then what I would get out of Nathan for the rest of the week was just that much more. As long as I could help him castle and protect that Tuesday night dinner. And, I've also found that it changes for people. At that same time, I kind of did the reflection myself and I realized I just loved traveling and I loved getting out and seeing the world, but I often felt like I couldn't. I just felt like there was just so much going on, couldn't step away. But I found if I waited up to like 6 months before I took a trip or did something, then I'd be really resentful. My team could feel it, I could feel it. But if like every 4 months or so, I just like went somewhere new, somewhere that I was excited about, and just missed every standing meeting one time.
Which is about a week.
About a week, right? It was actually really good for me, and it was also really good for my team. Because I'd be like, oh, look, like she's gone, and like everything's still running, everything's still fine. And it was also good for me to see and feel that too, that, things were well organized and, there was enough of priorities understood and shared that all of that could just continue. And so for me, that was my rhythm. If I felt like work was so intense, I couldn't get away every now and then, a couple weeks a year, then that would be something that would make me resentful. Now for me, it's
changed.
I would say it's changed, but I think a lot of it's changed probably because of kids, because I'm probably more like the soccer mom, and I'm an occasional soccer mom myself, than I am like that, 20-something, 30-something, wanderlust. And so for me, it is about, now I'm always optimizing. Can I be there at bedtime? Can I be there at breakfast? Can I do the school drop-off? Because I find that with kids, a lot of times, yes, quality time matters, but quantity matters too. And the good news is a lot of those things happen outside of normal working hours or when people are expecting you to be, synchronously available. But those are the things that I really prioritize now. And of course, every working mom misses bedtime sometimes, misses breakfast, sometimes misses doing the school drop-off. My husband's great and does school drop-off 2 or 3 times a week. We pretty much share it evenly. But everyone misses that sometimes. But if I miss it too many times or too many times in a row, I'll start to feel that sense coming in that things are out of balance or that I'm not really respecting my rhythm, and then I know I need to make adjustments.
When you got the Yahoo job, you were pregnant, right? With your first kid?
I was approached when I was like 24 or 25 weeks pregnant with my first child, McAllister. And by the time I took the role, I think I was 28 or 29 weeks. So I was actually in my 3rd trimester when I took the role.
How insane was that? It's not like this was your 3rd kid. This is your first kid. It's not like this is your 5th CEO job. This is your first CEO job. It's not like this is any CEO job. This is the CEO of Yahoo, who, might I add, this is the 7th CEO that has come in 61 months.
If you count the interims, yes.
If you count the interims, which, since when do we not? I mean, seriously, how insane was that? Did it feel insane? Did you even internalize that?
It didn't feel insane. It felt intense.
Did it?
And so what was intense about it is, it was a very secretive search. Most people didn't know that I was applying for the role.
How so?
One, I was very happy at Google. I wasn't looking to leave. And so I didn't necessarily want people to know that I was even entertaining it. 2, the media is just really, really interested in Yahoo to a disproportionate degree. And the board there and the leadership was very leaky. So everything about the search was ending up in the press. And I didn't want
previous searches.
And I didn't want my previous searches and in the current search, right? Like I knew who the other candidates were that they were interviewing, but they didn't necessarily know who I was, right? And I didn't want my name out there because I wasn't even sure I wanted to throw my hat in the ring. Not because I always admired Yahoo, wanted to be a part of it, was really honored. And I also, to me, I approach work as a design problem. And being a leader in a company, especially being the CEO of a company, is you get to work on one of the biggest design problems ever. You get to work on the design of the product line, the business, the team, the marketing, the company as a whole, all of those components and how they all work together. And so I was really excited about the Yahoo piece, but I didn't really know if I could do it. I hadn't been a CEO before. I hadn't been a mom before. But I also knew that this opportunity might not come around again. And I really wanted to talk with people to get perspective on, is this something that I could do and do as well as I felt I would need to do it? And is the bar that high? Because the bar was very, very high. I talked to some people about it, but I didn't get to talk to many. I ended up talking with 3 or 4 people beyond like my husband and my core family about it beforehand. And for me, it was really about the fact that the opportunity for me was so perfect in terms of being really congruent with things I had worked on at Google and knowing I could add a lot of value there, So it was even less about the CEO piece because, I didn't go to business school. I wasn't necessarily on the track to become a CEO. I don't know that that was something that was ever really on my radar, but I do really value leadership, and I really valued what Yahoo had done for the world and for the internet and for Google. I was really excited about that opportunity, and I felt I could add a lot of value, and I didn't know how to bring the child piece into it, the mom piece into it. But I felt like a lot of other people can do it. There's probably a way to do it. I'm going to have to try and figure out what way would work for me. In the end, became very clear the Yahoo board was supportive of me doing whatever I needed to do. But once I had a good look at the company, it was really clear I couldn't take, I was hoping for a 6-month maternity leave at Google. And it was very clear I couldn't take that type of leave at Yahoo. The company just couldn't be put on hold that long. But I also feel for me, I found my way of doing it was I'm not the type of person who likes to totally slow down. And I think if I had totally slowed down and just been like, nope, I'm fully on leave, I'm not doing any work. Going from like 100 down to going from 100 to 0, which is not to say that obviously you're doing a lot of other really important things as a mom, but if you're like, wait, I'm going to go from doing 100 work at 100 miles an hour to doing work at 0 miles an hour, and I'm going to try and go back up to 100 again. That's hard. But for me, I'm at 100 and I'm like coming down to 75, and I'm going to get back up to 100 again. That would be easier for me and was clearly part of it. But I didn't know about myself until I was actually in the role. So I had to take it, and I talked with all the board members about it, how I thought I would do it. And I said, I'm sure there's some things that I don't know, and there's some things I'll have to change as I'm in the role, and we'll have to figure out as it's in the role. But I wanted to try. And I felt that I could probably succeed in having the baby and being the CEO. And I also knew that I would probably regret it if I didn't at least give it a chance.
Mm-hmm. And what did 75 look like? What did you end up having to do?
It turns out, and I think it's gotten better now, but it wasn't totally clear how to communicate with the SEC that the CEO is on maternity leave, because there's just not that many in public companies. And maternity leave is classified as a disability leave. So you really have to declare your CEO disabled in order to actually declare it as a maternity leave, which seems wrong, doesn't it? That seems really wrong,
seems
right?
Odd.
And so I was like, okay, we just should not spend our energy figuring this out. And so I was like, just let me go into vacation debt. So if you actually look back, I think at the books, it's not even recorded as a maternity leave. I was never on disability leave with the state of California or anything like that, because it was just too complicated. It actually was recorded as a vacation. So I immediately joined Yahoo and then went into vacation debt for my maternity leave and had to earn my way back out of it. And so there were things like that. I also knew that, so I had to be back on the job within about 2 weeks after I had the baby. And so, went back to the office, but I sort of knew I would have to, and this probably plays to some of the core themes of the Grit podcast. I knew I was going to have to take personal and professional and mash it together. So it's funny because I didn't get to take a maternity leave, I talk about that I almost did an inverted maternity leave because it's a bit personal, but I knew I wanted time with my baby. Mostly, I also knew I wanted to breastfeed and really have that bond and give them, the type of start that gives an infant. And so it was controversial at the time, and I think largely misunderstood because there were other CEOs that had made big play palaces and things next to their office. I found the small closet space off of my office that was 8 feet by 10 feet that was used as a coat closet previously. And I was like, okay, I'll just soundproof it and I'll have my baby in there with our nanny. And that way I can go in and feed him.
Wow, yeah.
It didn't work out for the full 6 months, but for a good 3 months or so, McAllister would come and spend a few hours every day, mostly to get fed, every now and then for playtime or a book, in the little closet off of my office. It was windowless, by the way, so inside nobody could actually see that whether he was there or not. And that overall worked for me, but it was almost like inverting a maternity leave. Instead of being home and doing a little bit of work while you're on your maternity leave, I was working and having my maternity leave in part come to the office.
Good for you.
So as I said, it was overstated, and that they were like, "Oh, look, she's got this."
Listen,
she's got this giant.
everything's overstated in your.
Well,
and if you read anything
people
about
were like,
you,
"Oh
it's
my
all,
gosh!" Like she had a nursery, and I was like, "Oh no!" Like it was like this really small, not very prominent feature that was just right there anyway. And I think in retrospect, later, one of my people who helped, a great guy named Brian Power, who was my head of people, said, like, why didn't you just call it a mother's room? But it was 2012, and like that kind of wasn't a thing yet.
In retrospect,
and so
I just wish
I basically had a mother's room.
Who cares?
On
like
campus.
In retrospect, I just wish that like none of this was even. I wish we were celebrating it.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that has to be acknowledged is there are other moms who might want to do that, and they may or may not have the discretion to be able to do that at
Totally.
work. And I understand that I was very privileged to be able to do it that way. But I also realized that there's a lot I gave up, right, in terms of having an at-home maternity leave with my infant. And I just did what I thought was best for the company, best for me, and best for the baby. And I feel like I hit a pretty good balance.
Yeah.
And I'm very pro rights. I think women should. I think this is all really hard, and it's all really personal.
Yeah.
And I think there is, to your point, way too much judgment about it all. And I think it'd be better if people just acknowledge it's whether you're a working mom, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you take a long leave or a short leave, breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, there's just entirely too much judgment with it all. People should do it the way that works for them, and employers should be supportive of that.
I heard that there was quotes from the board. One of the quotes said, "I've hired many CEOs. This was one of the best interviews ever." Did you know this, by the way? I mean, like...
I had not heard that.
You knocked everybody's socks off in this interview. And that's saying something, considering they've done it's like 6 times, however many interviews of each CEO round. Do you remember that interview? Do you remember the prep for it? Could you go into what went into that?
Sure. I got a phone call from a guy named Jim Citrin, who works at Spencer Stuart, about the CEO search at the end of June. It was all very secretive. He had me start to talk to members of the NomGov committee. And through those discussions, I started looking at different materials on Yahoo, starting to pull together my own analysis, using the products, starting to develop a thesis. This was all over 4th of July. That year, I remember I was going with my husband and my in-laws. We were in Steamboat Springs, Colorado for 4th of July that year, for whatever reason. My husband's from Colorado, so I think that's where they decided we should have the family holiday. And so I had to keep going back to the hotel room to prep for this interview, because I knew once I got back, I think it was the following Monday or Tuesday, I had this interview. And there's also, I remember I was also going back and forth. I think it was the Aspen Ideas Festival or something equivalent to that, where I was going back and forth between Steamboat Springs and Aspen in Colorado on these long drives and doing a lot of studying there. And I remember my in-laws kept kind of wondering, like, what are you prepping for? And I was like, I have to go work on this and prep, and we'll explain it all later if it comes to bear. So I was very well prepared. I'd probably in total spent 30 to 40 hours using products, reading analyst reports, reading outside opinions on the company, and in particular on the product line. And then they told me they're interviewing 3 people. A black car would pull up to my stated address at 10 in the morning. I should approach the black car. This is the days before Uber, or yes, early days of Uber, so they weren't using it yet. And I should approach the black car and say Project Cardinal. and if they said yes, then I should get in the back seat and go wherever they were taking me, because, you know, there were people like staking out the other board meetings. So they literally declared where the press was staking out other board meetings. So they declared where the interviews would be that morning. They didn't tell the candidates where we were going. We had to get into black town cars, and we were taken to a law office, and then went in, and the whole Yahoo board was sitting there. And then they interviewed, and the interview went on, I think it was like for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so I remember being really well prepped on the products, high level prepped on the overall finances and where they were in the state of decline and turnaround, but mostly really well prepped on the products, because I also, being a product manager and being really product focused, that's where I felt I could bring the most insight. And I did have a core thesis in the interview where I said, you know, look, I don't have all the details, but in broad brushstrokes, the things that Yahoo does, mail, search, maps, stocks, news, sports. These are all things that should be on the phone. And right now, Yahoo's almost entirely on the web and on desktop. And I think that, my vision would be these products need to become the core players in their specific verticals on the phone. And I had lots of views in terms of how we should do that. Native applications rather than HTML5 and other things. But the core thesis was, let's take Yahoo and go mobile, which now seems completely obvious, but in 2012 was not obvious. In fact, when I got to the company, there was a debate within the company, and by the way, raging across Silicon Valley, of HTML5 versus native. Microsoft and BlackBerry were still in the mix. I even had a moment where I kind of put my foot in my mouth because I talked about smartphones and I left BlackBerry off, and everyone got very offended, and I felt really bad about it. But also, in my view, they weren't really part of the smartphone revolution that I was trying to get Yahoo to be a part of. But it was that long ago, right? That it really felt like the player space in mobile was starting to emerge as an iOS Android duopoly, but that was far from clear in 2012. And the whole debate between HTML5 versus native was completely still going on. I had theses about where those went, and those ultimately ended up becoming true, where it became a duopoly with native apps really carrying a lot more sway and success. But those were key pieces that I talked about in that interview. I don't remember all the parts of the interview. I do just remember it was just under 2 hours long. And I remember there being lots of questions. I think every single member of the board asked a question, and some of them asked 2 or 3.
Was there an opportunity for you to ask?
By the way, there were 13 board members. So it was a lot of questions.
Did you get to ask any questions?
I think I probably asked some.
Did you walk out of there thinking, if I get this job, I'm taking it? Did you already know that?
So it's very dramatic. The whole story is very dramatic.
This is insane.
So it's very dramatic. As I was doing my prep, we had gotten back from Colorado. I remember I was sitting at my counter in the kitchen in Palo Alto, and I had just read an article that said what stands between Ross Levinsohn and the Yahoo CEO role. And the answer was only time.
And Ross Levinsohn was the interim at this point?
He was the interim, and he was also interviewing for the role. Uh-huh. And my husband walked in and said, what's the matter? Because he just saw the look on my face. And I was like, I don't think I'm a real candidate for this role. This article says that Ross is going to get it. What if I'm just being put through all this prep to be the CEO of Yahoo? And they already know they're going to give it to Ross. It turns out the chairman of the board got up and told the whole company, it's probably going to be Ross. And they might just feel like they have to do this for due diligence. And I'm not even really being considered. And he was like, one, don't think about that. He's like, whoever wrote that article doesn't know anything.
This is why you don't read press.
Right. He's like, they don't know anything. He's like, you're actually in this interview process. They don't know anything. And 2, he's like, just do your best. Just try for it. It's clear now. Now by reading that and seeing your reaction, now you know you want it. So he's like, feed off of that and be ready. And so that was really good because that got me fired up. And I was like, wow, and I was like, maybe I can do it. I'm having a baby. I was still very much. And then I was like, he's right. I want it.
Yeah.
And I need to get ready. And he's like, and by the way, maybe that's how the board feels today. Maybe it's going to be Ross by default. But you've got your foot in the door. You're getting an interview with the Yahoo board of directors. You've been prepping all week. You blew off my parents all weekend, right? 'Cause I blew off my in-laws all weekend. He's like, you just be ready for this because it's clear that you want it. And then that night, I went to a dinner party. And the whole thing was really pretty funny. So I have this terrific friend, Lori Puccinelli Stern, who's a big character. She'll love that she's been mentioned on the podcast. And she played a role in this, but Lori's terrific. And so Lori throws these epic dinner parties, wonderful Italian food, the best guest list, so much fun. And she entertains at our house in the city, and she's just amazing. And so she had put together a dinner party that night. And so Zach and I were going to the dinner party. And I knew that the Yahoo board was going to interview people all day and then deliberate over the dinner. And then then there were going to be calls. And I have a really firm rule that when I'm at dinner, whether it's in my home or out to eat, I do not look at my phone. So my phone was in my purse and I didn't pull it out once during the whole dinner party. I wanted to, and I was like, what's going on? Like, do I have the job? Do I not? Am I gonna actually like check my voicemail after dinner and just find out like you didn't get it? Like it's going to Ross after all, and it's all, back onto the like launch Google Maps for Apple and take your maternity leave in October plan. And so I was sitting there, and even worse, my husband played college football for Harvard. And Lori invited Joe Montana and Jennifer Montana to the dinner party and seated Zach right next to him. And of course, like nobody at the dinner party knows that I've interviewed for the Yahoo CEO role that day, right? Like I'm just sitting there and I'm sitting there like mouthing to Zach across the table, like, we've got to go, right? Like, and Zach is like pointing at Joe Montana. Like, I'm sitting next to Joe Montana. Like, I'm not going to go anywhere, right? Like, I'm like, let's go. And he's like, Joe Montana, right? And I was like, so we are there until, I don't know, 10:15, 10:20. At one point, I finally broke away and went to the bathroom with my purse and pulled my phone out. No messages, no calls, nothing. And I was like, obviously they're going to call the rejects after they call the CEO. It's like dinner's over. I didn't get it. I would have been the first call if I got it. Go back to the dinner table. Joe and Jennifer finally leave. So then my husband's actually willing to leave because Joe Montana has left the building or left Lori's house. And then as we were walking down the stairs, I heard my purse start to ring. My phone was in it and I heard it start to ring. Or maybe I felt it. I don't remember which. I think I heard it. And didn't pull it out. Didn't stop. Like, wasn't going to stop in the middle of Lori's steps and like take this call. So I just calmly got into the car, opened it up, and saw a message from Jim Citrin. I still have it. I still listen to it every now and then because it just made my heart stop because he opens the message and he says, Marissa, you should be. And then he has like the longest pause ever. And I thought for sure he was going to be like, Marissa, you should be so proud of yourself for how well prepared you were and how you conducted yourself in this interview, but you didn't get it. And he was, and so instead he says, Marissa, you should be smiling right now because you're the new CEO of Yahoo. And he left it all in this message. And of course I had to call him back. But anyway, so very dramatic. So I went from like not really sure I even wanted to go for it to really realizing the weekend before that I really wanted it. Sometimes you need to see what you almost lost in order to know that you really want it. And seeing that article that said I had basically anyone going up against Ross had no chance really fired me up. And then I had to it was the most anticipatory evening ever at this wonderful dinner party. The dinner party was so much fun. And for minutes at a time, I could distract myself with the dinner party. But like the whole time I was like,
of course,
is there a message? Like what's going on right now? But I was like, I just have to not, I can't do anything. Like I just have to be here. And Zach is so happy he's sitting next to Joe Montana.
Do you still listen to that voicemail every once in a while?
I have it still. So,
no way.
So every now and then, yeah. I could probably play it.
Can you play it? Can you play it? It's interesting because even...
I think that I have sentimental emails. Well, I have sentimental voicemails, like my dad calling and singing me happy birthday. Just I was like, I keep that stuff.
Well, even I noticed, Marissa, when we were on Zoom, I made a comment to you like, geez, what's up with all the like toys and hardware in the background? And it was a bunch of mementos from Google that were sentimental to you.
Yeah, no, I'm a sentimental person. So I keep these things that, make me happy. I remember like when I bought Zagat at Google, my parents left me this hilarious message.
Zagat, the restaurant.
Zagat, the restaurant guide. And so like I have that on there too. Cause I remember listening to it with Tim and Nina Zagat in their office. And like, we just thought it was like the most hilarious voicemail ever. So I do keep funny voicemails, but this is, I don't know if it'll pick up.
Play. It'll pick up.
I'll put it on speaker and then, yeah.
Hey, Marissa, it's Jim, and I'm here with Michael. I'm going to leave you this little voicemail. You should be smiling. We're smiling. Call me ASAP. Bye.
Oh my God. Also, it's like a terrible quality voicemail. Like this is from so long ago.
Yeah.
He was very monotone.
He was very monotone, so I was like, "Oh," when he's like, "You should be."
It didn't sound like. It didn't sound like.
Well, here I'm going to leave you with this voicemail, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, is he really going to leave me a decline in a voicemail for a role that matters as much to me?" And then he was like, "You should be smiling."
It didn't seem like he was smiling.
I loved him, but anyway, yeah, the boy. I mean, it was obvious when he said smiling to me that I had gotten it, and then I called him and we went through a few days of negotiation on the
So you didn't
parts of the
accept
contract.
like on the spot?
I said I'm inclined to take it, but obviously we need to work different pieces out.
Comp type stuff.
Yeah, comp mostly, but also just like different terms. Like I wanted to talk with the board about bringing in a team of people and, you know, whether or not I was going to have their support for the kinds of changes I was going to need to make in the company. So some of those things needed to be talked about.
And so you waited until after you got the role to have some of those types of conversations.
So I got that voicemail, and then we had a meeting at the Rosewood at 6 a.m. the next morning. So like 8 hours later.
Like across the street, Rosewood?
Yeah, like right there.
Yeah.
In one of the bungalows, there was a meeting there with the comp committee.
6 a.m.
Yep. With my employment attorney, who had only kind of helped me with kind of small personal matters for like assistance and things like that at home. And so he was kind of, had his breath kind of taken away by the whole thing. And I called him at 10:20 at night and said, I need your help negotiating an offer for me.
Yahoo CEO.
And I was like, this would be kind of bigger than the last thing you helped me with. But he's a great employment attorney. He actually was like one of the early employment attorneys at Tesla. And so he turned up there and we got the first offers and, sort of the first approach in terms of how to think about the comp, and then also started raising some of the questions around how to execute the turnaround. And in particular, I was like, look, it's not just my comp. To bring in some of the people I think we're going to need here to ultimately execute the type of turnaround we're trying to execute. Like, we're going to have to be ready to make several offers that are above what the company has historically done and potentially even, above average in the market. So we had those conversations, and I think I got the offer, I think it was like a Wednesday night. And then I took Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to negotiate it. And I actually went to my parents' cabin that weekend because I just wanted to kind of be away. I didn't want to talk to people. I was worried about different things. I didn't want leaks. And I just also wanted to think through. I'd been at Google for a really long time and I really loved it and I didn't want to leave. And I had so many people there and so many different initiatives that I cared about. The APM program, Google Maps, Google Search. Like, there were just so many different pieces there that I really cared about and was really invested in, that I kind of went and I said, I just need to go somewhere, be in my own head and press the fast forward button and make sure that if it's 5 years from now, I won't regret having made this decision. And then on Sunday night, I came back and I decided that I would take the role. They called me and they asked, who do you need to talk to in order to be convinced? The board's convinced they want to hire you. Who do you need to talk to? And at first I said, I want to talk to Zod. Zod was my friend Farzad Nazem, who was the original CTO of Yahoo. And I knew he would tell me all about the technical underpinnings and what was happening overall in the company and give me perspective there on the state of things technologically at Yahoo. And I'd always had great respect for David Philo, the founder of Yahoo, who had been really instrumental in the founding of Google and also in the Google deal. Had met him one or two times just when I was an engineer at Google and we were doing the Yahoo deal. He came over to do the announcement and we were all like, oh my gosh, like the king of the internet is coming to like announce our deal. And I still remember he was like, we're really kind of nervous about picking this little search engine to power our search. So we really need you guys to work hard. And we're like, we're working so hard.
This is when Yahoo chose Google to be the search
in 2000,
engine.
In the summer of 2000. So I'd met him a few times before, but only very tangentially and in crowds. And so I said, I really would like to understand for David Philo why he's stayed all these years and what his view on the company and its prospects are. Because Jerry had stepped off of the board just a few months earlier, I think January of that year. And then I thought about it more because the board was like, what's the minimal set? And I was like, the truth is I want to talk to Zod. And I did ultimately talk to Zod about the state of technology at Yahoo and his view, because he was the longtime CTO and really operated at a very high level and scale. But I realized I wanted Zod's help, but it wasn't going to talk me out of doing the role. I realized the only thing that could really talk me out of or into doing the role and actually making the call was talking to Philo. So I said, and interesting, David Philo wasn't on the board at that time. So they were like, oh, now we have to go tell Philo that this is the CEO candidate for the company that he was the founder of and works at, but he's not on the board of. And they're like, how are we going to get Marissa and Philo together to have this conversation? And we didn't know it, but we lived on the same street.
No way.
Palo Alto is that small of a town. So anyway, they were like, everyone was like scheming about how to get us together. And then Philo was like, once he saw the address, he's like, should I just walk over and have pizza? So he came over on Sunday night and walked 3 blocks down Addison and had pizza and talked all about the company. And I realized I was really compelled. He very much believed in Yahoo and what it did for people and the value and the purpose and the technology and all of those pieces.
Those 4 days.
After those conversations with Philo, then I knew, I was like, then I called the board afterwards and said, I'm prepared to sign.
Wow. Okay.
And then they said, okay, we're going to have you talk with the New York Times in the morning. We'll have you come in and sign your contract. I think it was either at 10 or 11 a.m. We'll have Fred, the chairman, come in and sign the contract from his side. And then we'll make the announcement after close of market that day.
Wow. That is intense.
And so I had gotten permission from the board to tell Larry and Sergey and Eric about my departure before the close of business.
Monday.
On Monday. So
they didn't know. They still had no clue.
They had no idea. And so I still was sitting there. I was sitting there at my desk and I was about to send notes saying like, hey, can I talk to you, to each of them? And also I got a call from the board and they said, you can't. You can't talk to them this early. You can't talk to them yet. You can't tell your team that you're leaving. I was going to tell Eric, Larry, and Sergey where I was going, but I wasn't going to tell my team where I was going. I was just going to tell them that I was leaving. And they were like, well, but a rumor might erupt that you're coming as the Yahoo CEO. And if you are, then we'll have to halt the stock. Especially if it starts to move a lot in one direction or another, if there's, material information that the investors don't have and it's mismanaged during market hours, it can be bad. So I was like, well, that would be a terrible outcome as my first move as CEO, that I got the stock halted because I chose to talk to my team. So put off talking to them until about noon. And then at noon, reached out to Eric, Larry, and Sergey, managed to reach Sergey and talk to him in person. The other two I talked to by phone. And then I had to go at the end of my conversation with Sergey because I was like, my phone started to blow up and I was like, the news is on the wire now. And so
there was nothing
I've got to leave the building.
Like there was nothing they could do. Did they not come back with a Godfather?
Well, no, by that point I had already been announced. The contract was signed. The
cake was baked.
It was done. I think that's the way you have to do it.
Yeah.
I was like, I wasn't, I was really well compensated at Google.
Totally.
I was very senior. I was really happy. There wasn't a mandate or something that they could have done that would have changed my mind. It was that, look, I've spent my career all at one company and I really love companies and I love building them and working on them. And now it's time for me to spread my wings and see what I've learned and see how it plays in another domain and in the same space, but in another company. And this is really about that learning experience and that working on that type of design problem. And so that ultimately is what drove it. It wasn't about trying to get a better offer. So I didn't bother.
That next day you started as the CEO?
So that day I left Google. My mom and my then assistant Trish had to pack up my office because I had to leave. I went to the law office where they had interviewed me. So I didn't yet go to Yahoo campus and took interviews and calls for the rest of the day. Then that night we realized that we needed to announce that I was pregnant because we announced that I was the CEO, but not yet that I was pregnant. I felt that the team at Yahoo needed to know that before I arrived. And so we announced that night. And then the next morning I showed up at Yahoo, and Philo, because we had pizza together 2 days earlier, was kind enough to be there early and greet me along with some of the members of the board. And they escorted me upstairs and I got started. So it was about, 17, 18 hours after leaving Google that I started at Yahoo.
What a whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind. I think when I went back, I looked at the dates, and I think I got the call from Jim Citrin on June 24th, and I started at Yahoo on July 17th.
June 24th, July. That's pretty quick.
Yeah.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
About 3.5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And just to give context on, in the early 2000s, the peak of Yahoo stock was 118-ish billion. Sorry, $118 a share. I don't even know what the
market cap, I think, was about 100 billion.
100 billion, yeah, okay. In the months leading up to you getting there, it was $14 to $15 a share. When did excitement wear away and reality set in of the task at hand?
I have to say, I think I really enjoyed meeting everyone, getting to know new people, meeting with different teams every day to understand the state of their product and what they were working on. And so I would say the work, we got started right away. on all the work and all the meetings and all of that. And so there wasn't a lot of time for like, hooray, I'm here, because I had to immediately turn around and start lining up my team. Ross, who had obviously missed out on his opportunity to be the CEO, was still there, was technically my COO/CRO. And so I needed to resolve that. I needed to, put together a plan. The day that I started was also an earnings call day. And they wanted me to do the earnings call. And I said, it wasn't my quarter. Like, I wasn't here for one day of the quarter that's being reported on. And I just don't feel that I can answer questions aptly. So Tim Morse, the CFO, did the earnings call that day. But I needed to get my team in order. And I needed to figure out whether this hypothesis I had around mobile would actually work. So I think, we got to work pretty quickly. I do remember some of the stats right away the first day. They mentioned to me that 24% of the company had left between January and July. So 1 in 4 people at the company had left.
Leading up to you joining.
Either had been laid off or had walked in those 6 months. So I do remember this story I just retold last month to someone, where I came out of this HR meeting where they were just like, everyone's left. And there were even people, we started hiring boomerangs. We started hiring people back who still believed in the company and wanted to come back and wanted another go at it. So we started going and getting back some of the really good people who had left. But I came out of this HR meeting and I would go down each day to the cafeteria and get a salad and meet people and talk to people. And I would just sit in the cafeteria for however long I could afford to sit there, for an hour or two, just letting people come up to me and talk to me and say whatever they wanted to say. And while I was like making my salad, this guy came and smacked my tray while I was like walking around to kind of get my attention. I was like, stopped and looked up, and he's like, is it go time? And I just come out of this meeting where they were like, everyone's leaving. I was like, oh no, please don't go. I've only been here for 4 days. I was like, I think we can really do great things here. And he's like, no. He's like, is it go time? He's like, there's a whole bunch of us that have been sitting here forever, waiting for the board to figure itself out, waiting for leadership to figure itself out. And we've got good ideas. And we want to know, like, is it go time? And I was like, yes, it's go time. Like, go. Like, I was like, look, if this was an easy problem, there's been a lot of smart people who've been through this place. Like, someone would have figured it out a long time ago. So we're going to need everyone to bring their best ideas, and absolutely, like, don't stop. Like, keep working. We need to keep going. But I still remember the fact that I misunderstood, is it go time? To me, like, he might actually be like leaving the company today or just quit today. It kind of tells you that the bloom had come off the rose, and that was like day 4.
Totally. Your first year at Yahoo, the stock almost doubles to around $31 a share. By the way, maybe this is not true, so you tell me. This is true, right?
That is true.
Okay. You gave me a look like maybe it wasn't true.
It was important to realize that we had a large Alibaba asset. No one knew how big or how well it was doing.
Yeah.
And how big it was getting because it was a private company. But there's no question that some of that appreciation was from that. I also think we did a good job reinventing the product line, and we were starting to see some lift overall in traffic.
You had your mojo going.
And things like that. And I will say, I think sometime in 2013, there were different things that had clearly seen a resurgence in Yahoo's traffic in that year. We talked about the flywheel of the consumer internet, which is you hire great people, they build great products, those products attract users, those users attract advertisers, those advertisers give you money, which helps you hire more great people, and the flywheel continues. And so we were like, look, like, we've hired great people, we made the products better, we're starting to see the traffic turn. Now we've got to fuel that into like actual revenue and the like. But, for that first year, we definitely saw those things start to line up. And also the Alibaba piece was playing a part. So I have to give voice to both of them because that's just realistic. They both played roles.
You ended up buying 20 or so companies. One of them was Tumblr. Was that your biggest one?
I think Tumblr was the biggest I did at Yahoo.
1.1? Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that? I find it fascinating.
So one of the things is I bought a lot of companies. It was a lot talked about. We basically bought the same number of companies that some of the others in the space bought.
Can I interrupt you for a second
yes.
on my question about Tumblr? All of the rumor mill that I was reading at the time thought, wow, Yahoo got Tumblr. at the time, Yahoo's brand was at the point where they were losing all these sexy acquisitions to Google and Facebook, etc. And so I remember the headlines were kind of stunned that you managed to win Tumblr.
And so what I will say is we definitely felt Tumblr was a big prize. And Instagram had been bought the previous year, wasn't available, may not have sold to Yahoo anyway, but wasn't available by the time I got there in July of 2012, because it was April 2012 that it was acquired by Facebook. And Tumblr, I think David Karp had gotten to the point where he realized that he wasn't going to be able to scale it into a business himself and was looking for a strategic acquirer. And so we got really excited around Tumblr. It was obviously played to the media piece, lots of user-generated content. There was a lot of things that really worked well for Tumblr. And there's no question it was a prize. We had kept that very quiet, that we were working on it, and we've had it under letter of intent, and we were working on the agreement. And the great thing was we had this huge Flickr announcement lined up for that Monday in May. It was like Monday, like somewhere in the 20s of May. And the idea was we were going to surprise at this Flickr announcement, which the press all knew about, had been invited to at Times Square, and mention at the end, also mention that we had bought Tumblr and surprise everyone. Uh-huh. There was a leak the week before. I think I know who the leak was, but I'm not going to go there. But then interestingly, because of that, the rumor was, and I'm pretty sure it was true, Mark Zuckerberg flew to New York to try to intervene. And so I was texting back and forth with David Karp, who was like founder of Tumblr, who was like literally avoiding his apartment and avoiding his office and like just trying to stay, because he was like, Zuck is texting me, trying to find me, trying to, have conversations about whether or not they can buy Tumblr, and I'm exclusive with you, and we're trying to do this deal, and my whole team is asking me questions.
And he didn't want to blow it up.
My whole team is asking me questions about what's going on. I was in New York that weekend then too, and so I got there, I think on Friday night or Saturday morning, and it all came together. But I remember it felt very competitive at the time, and our plans for Tumblr didn't necessarily work out the way that we hoped. We hoped that we hoped that it would monetize better. I think that there definitely were some issues in our execution of the monetization strategy and also of the ad engine to put on it. And I think that when we bought it, the content was still more mainstream, and afterwards, as time went on, it just became slightly different, slightly harder to monetize. I mean, I still think about it, and I was like, Taylor Swift's major like publishing platform was Tumblr at that time, right? And you're like, wait, like everyone, like all the Swifties were on Tumblr, like waiting for Taylor to like post her Tumblr. And so,
you're like, did we blow it type thing?
Well, I think that it was more mainstream, but I think as we were first too slow to put monetization on. And so we said, look, we don't want to mess it up. We don't want to mess the balance of it. We're going to let it keep growing. And we did. But as it grew and as time moved on, I would say that Instagram kind of went even more mainstream, and the media and the advertisements around it became very embraced. Yeah. And Tumblr kind of became the opposite side of that, where it became much harder for people to accept ads on the platform. And also advertisers would sometimes say, well, look at this content. We don't necessarily want to appear next to this, because there was just sometimes seedier content, just more controversial, NSFW, things like that. And so, but that wasn't necessarily the case when we bought it. There's always some of that. And so the monetization didn't live up to where we wanted it to be. And I do think we had execution issues with the leadership along the way. But I still would have done the acquisition even today.
You would have.
Though I think there were other interesting assets on the market around that time that we were considering. But I think
like who?
Rather not. I mean, I've talked about some of them, but doesn't really matter. I still would have done it, but I would have changed how quickly we integrated it, how quickly we put in a revenue team, how quickly we had introduced ads into the platform. Would have been careful how we did it, but would have done all of those things much earlier.
Yeah. Isn't hindsight funny? You're competing with Zuck. At that time, probably all you're thinking about is like, this guy. I'm going to win this. Yahoo's going to win this deal. And then eventually, like, it just didn't work out. It's just.
But I think it shows that, like, at the time, everyone thought it was a great asset.
Totally.
And we didn't necessarily do with it what we needed to do with it. And, that's on Yahoo and that's on the Tumblr team. But I do think it was a great asset. It was a great platform. There was a really big opportunity there. And it wasn't just that Yahoo was not the company that saw it. So it's one of those things where hindsight is 2020. Very proud of how we executed a lot of the product roadmap at Yahoo. That's one area where we could have and should have done better. And now we have the benefit of hindsight.
You did like 5 years at Yahoo?
Yes, about that.
And then sold it to Verizon.
Sold the core operating business to Verizon. The Alibaba asset remained its own company and became an investment entity.
When you were selling it, did you want to keep going?
Definitely. I mean,
you did.
I had an amazing team. We had a great product line. I had a great and really supportive board full of people I could learn from and were really supportive of what we were doing.
Like you felt like the fruits of your labor were just blossoming now.
And I felt really, really good about it. But at the same time, I knew that people had invested in Yahoo. At least some people invested in Yahoo for the Alibaba asset. And they wanted to see those proceeds after all that investment and all that time of holding it return to shareholders. So we designed a tax-free spinoff that we announced in January of 2015. Due to concerns about the tax code changing, that tax-free spinoff was called off in December of 2015, about a month before we were going to execute it. And then after that, we realized like we still have the same problem. We need to separate the core business from this asset. So the way we achieved that was by selling the core business and leaving the Alibaba asset in that public entity and then changing it to an I Corp rather than a C Corp. And so that's the way we ultimately did it. And yes, there were definitely some situations where I wasn't that excited to continue at Verizon, but I was excited if it was going to remain an independent company, public or private, is something I would have considered.
Yeah. I have a few questions on Google stuff. The first is, can you talk about Larry and Sergey bucks?
It was 2001. Larry and Sergey hired Eric Schmidt. I think he arrived in April or May of 2001.
Company was like a couple hundred people.
I think the company was smaller than that, maybe like around 100, maybe a little bit bigger than that, somewhere between 100 and 200. Oh no, I know exactly. It was about 200 people at the end of 2000. And I know that because our headcount plan was to double in 2001 from 200 to 400. So Eric comes in April, looks at our plan and says, no one can double, not in a year, not with the kind of quality that you'll need. And slash our headcount plan to 50. So instead of going from 200 to 400, we were going to go from 200 to 250. And I have to say, I think a lot of people just assume that like Google just happened. And I often say the actual experience of being inside of it was really quite different. There was a lot of hard work. There was a lot of strife. There was a lot of things that didn't go right. And this decision, I don't know that Eric even knew how unpopular it was, but like when the headcount, not mutiny, weeping, like people like literally, I remember some of my office mates, like who I won't call out by name.
They were so overworked?
But they were like just crying and being like, there's just so much work to do here. And like, we were barely going to get it done if we had 400 people, but now we're only going to have like 250, like only one new hire a week into the company. Who's going to do all this work, right? And then like sobbing and weeping, right? Like it was a huge gear shift for the whole company. And then we were like, okay, I guess this is what we're going to do. And so Eric printed up these certificates that looked like dollars that had Larry and Sergey, or maybe it was Wayne Rosing, the then VP of Eng. I think it might have been Eric. Maybe it was Wayne. I think it was Eric. But anyway, he printed them up and they had Larry's and Sergey's on them, the pictures on them, and they looked like dollar bills and they had serial numbers Sharpied into the upper corner. So we knew there were exactly 50. Then Eric had to figure out how to give them out to the VPs of the different departments.
And they represented hires.
And they represented hires. And so if you wanted to hire someone, you had to come with a resume and a packet worth of feedback. And then you had to have a Larry and Sergey on the front of it. And that was good for Eric to review your packet and give you the right to issue an offer letter. And of course, he didn't really kind of know how to like assign them out to the different VPs. And so, but then he kind of realized, and this is kind of the brilliance of Eric, realized it probably didn't matter how he assigned them out to the VPs because there would ultimately be a black market of Larry's and Sergey's, which is to say that like Omid would come over to engineering and be like, look, I think I can sell. I can get this contract. I can get this contract if you engineers build this feature. So I'll give you one of my Larry's and Sergey's if you hire an engineer and have them build this feature. She's like, there'll be kind of like a horse trading amongst the VPs. So probably the Larry's and Sergey's will get appropriately and fairly distributed.
Which was the point.
And it actually did make everyone work together and actually be like, wait, if we only get one hire this week, like, is this what we're using it on? But it ratcheted up the hiring bar, like just
something
enormously.
Really instructive about that, isn't it?
It ratcheted up the hiring bar really tremendously. And it made us really thoughtful about what we were spending our time on and what we weren't. And I have to say, I think, Eric gave so many great gifts to the company, but one of the great gifts he gave the company was the discipline to do that. Would the company have been good and done well if we had actually gone to 400 that year? Probably, but I think we actually went further, farther, and better, and we're far better off because we really, in that moment of just insane hypergrowth, really took the time to think through what to work on and who to hire to do it and what the distribution of those new hires should be. So even though the Larry and Sergey bucks were really pretty cheesy, they really enforced the right decision making.
When you went to be the CEO of Yahoo, did you call Eric Schmidt and be like, so any thoughts here?
Eric has been a great mentor to me all through my career, ever since I met him in 2001. And so he was terrific. He's an investor and a supporter of Sunshine, for which I'm really grateful as well. I have great relationship and great respect for so many of the leaders at Google, notably Eric, Larry, and Sergey, but the board members of the executive team. But I will say I've got great respect for them, love for them, but Eric's the person I learned the most from, at least during my time at Google. And I'm really grateful for learnings. And almost every day I hear an Ericism in my head. Like a situation will come up and I'll be like, Eric would say.
That's awesome. On the internet, so it's definitely true, but it was said that Eric told you that good executives don't get to do things.
Yes.
Can you explain that advice, if true?
He did say that. He was like, look, good executives don't get to do anything. He's like, when the last time you did something, Marissa? And I was like, what? And he's like, when did you design a UI? When did you write code?
Close a deal.
Like, when was the last time you did something? And he's like, good executives confuse themselves into thinking that they do things. And the truth is, you don't do anything. Your team does things. Great executives know it's their job to get people out of the way and let the team run. We're going in this direction. This is the vision. This is what we're doing. I'm going to clear the path and you're going to run. And that tying back to my comment on the go time thing from Yahoo, I was like, that's what it's about, right? He was like, wait, is the board going to figure itself out? Is leadership going to figure itself out? Is it go time? And I was like, yes, we're going for mobile. We're running in that direction. Like, yeah. I'll get everybody out of the way and you run.
Yeah. Yeah. When you joined Google at first 20 engineers, it was all engineers, right? Basically.
Pretty much. We had a receptionist.
And when you walked in, you were like,
we had some IT guys. Yeah.
But like mostly engineers. You must have been like, wow, these people are really good.
I thought they were incredibly smart and incredibly ambitious. So when I was deciding on my job at Google, I sat back. It was 1999, the height of the first internet bubble. And I was graduating from Stanford with a CS master's with a specialization in AI and an undergraduate also with a specialization in AI, symbolic systems. And I got 14 job offers. Management consulting, startups, big companies like Oracle, teaching at CMU. Like I was a big teacher and lecturer and TA in the introductory programming courses at Stanford. So I loved teaching. And so I was thinking about all these different roles. And then I thought back about the best decisions I had ever made. And I decided I would pick really different decisions, not necessarily ones that were congruent and had easy threads to pull apart. So I picked going to Stanford. I picked changing my major because I thought I was going to be a doctor and was going to do biochem, and I switched to do symbolic systems instead. I did an internship that I felt really not ready for at SRI, Stanford Research Institute, in AI. And then I did a summer at the Union Bank of Switzerland in their research lab. So I moved to Switzerland for the summer, not speaking Swiss German, and lived there and worked there for a summer with some top-notch researchers. And I realized that the common thread among those four decisions was that I always worked with the smartest people I could find. So I feel like when you work with really smart people, they cause you to level up, think about things more deeply. They just up your game. Same thing happens in sports physically, right? You play with better people, you get better. If you are, spending time with people who are smarter than you, you get smarter and you get more strategic and analytical in the way you're thinking about things. And I always did something I felt a little not ready to do. Not necessarily completely crazy, but uncomfortable in those decisions. And so when I looked at the different offers, I felt that Google embodied that the best. One, I found that Craig Silverstein, who was the first employee at Google, is still among one of the smartest people I've ever met. David Philo is as smart as Craig, but they're both they're so smart. It's infuriating how smart they are. And Larry and Sergey were smart, but in a different way. And smart in a way that also embodied ambition, where I could tell they had made this arc from being computer science PhDs, like eating pizza for breakfast and like coding all night, to being businessmen who were talking about building a Fortune 500 company, which was crazy when they had 7 people and they couldn't even afford to have a janitor vacuum the floors of the office when I went in and interviewed for the first time. But I realized that I would learn more going there and trying to help them build a Fortune 500 company than I would going somewhere else and giving advice or just coding and not necessarily being there trying to help in this more audacious, ambitious goal and getting to participate in that way. So my end analysis was, even though it's funny, I have a matrix I filled out of different attributes of the job and how I thought about it. And I gave Google a 2% chance of success. I gave every other startup I was talking a 0.02% chance of success. So I gave them about a 100x better shot at winning. But when you're sitting there and you're 7 or 8 people, the 8th person started that morning. Amit Patel and interviewed me that day, right? He was like, I just started this morning. I don't know what to ask you yet for an interview. And they're talking about building a Fortune 500 company.
That's crazy.
You're just like, they're probably going to fail. But if they succeed, how many people get to be in the first 10 or 20 of a Fortune 500 company? The answer is 5,000 or 10,000. That's only if everything goes really perfectly and really up and to the right. But I'll learn more even if I fail. It's funny because now the musical Hamilton has this great song about it. It's called In the Room That It Happens. I had friends who were at the management consulting firm and they were talking to Fortune 500 CEOs and giving them advice. But then when the person makes the decision, are they going to take that strategy? Are they going to take that action? They kick the consultants out of the room and then have the discussion about what really matters. And then they bring the consultants back in to help execute it. And I was like, look, I think at Google, I might get to actually be in the room and actually hear, how do you decide to go after the Yahoo deal? How do you decide to go after the AOL deal? How do you decide whether you should double or whether you should only add 50 people this year? How do you think about that? What are the outcomes? I was like, I feel like I'll learn more, even if we fail there, than I will succeeding somewhere else.
Yeah. Small fun fact, they cut your interview off.
Yes.
To come to Kleiner Perkins.
I think it was to come to Kleiner because at the time I wasn't that facile.
To come see John Doerr for the Series A.
I wasn't that facile at names, but I do remember I was sitting there and then we were at the ping pong table, which is also the conference table. And Heather came in and said, you guys, I'm sorry, but you have to go to Kleiner. And and I didn't really know what that meant. And then they left. And then I heard lots of other people get up and leave. And then Heather came in and she said, I know it was really important that we do all of your interviews today because I know you're trying to make a decision as to your job, but the whole company has left to go to a pitch at the venture capital firm. So you're going to have to come back tomorrow.
Oh my gosh. Do you think you were a better engineer or a better leader?
I think I'm a very solid engineer and I think I'm a very good coder.
You still get hands on keyboard?
I still sometimes do coding, but not professionally. I wouldn't want to do it professionally.
But
I'd have to really brush up. But I would say at Google, they didn't do formal promotions, but later as I transitioned into product management, when I looked at the levels, I'd gone from level 3 to level 7 in the 2 or so years that I was an engineer. Yeah. I think by the end Urs told me I was something that basically equivalent of a staff engineer, which is pretty good for someone 2 years out of school. So
insane.
So I was a solid engineer and I strive to be a great leader. I strive to be a really good, empathetic leader and have great strategic vision. But I think that what I felt as I moved out of engineering into product is I do feel like I've got a really strong product sensibility.
Yeah.
In terms of what people like, how they use it, what bothers them, what drives adoption, and how to take technology and how to package it up for people. I think that is what I'm really strong at. And I also think over the years, I've always loved teaching. And I think that when I look back at my time at Google, also helping build the product management organization, founding the first APM program, which happened at Google because we just couldn't hire people fast enough, things like that. Those I was really good at with my product sensibilities, and I was also really good at identifying good product talent and helping show them the ropes and train them and mentor them, because some of the people I've come through the program I'm just profoundly proud of. Ryan Rakowski now runs all of Chrome and Android at Google. Brett Taylor went on to be the CTO of Facebook and then CEO of Salesforce. Now is left and is partnering on a startup with another one of the real success stories out of the APM program, Clay Bavor, who ran all of virtual reality for Google.
You hired all those guys.
I hired them all
and
put
you
them in the
started
program.
that because...
And also there's like great women too. Meena Radmakrishnan was the first PM ever at Uber. Avni Shah stayed at Google the whole time and ended up running all of Google education. So whenever anyone talks about Google Classroom and the way that it just saved education during the pandemic, they should be thanking Avni Shah, because she's the person who did that, and she led the team that really caused Google Classroom to help us all get through that really challenging educational moment well.
It's incredible. And you did that because you couldn't get enough, ostensibly Larry and Sergey bucks to get the resources to go hire all these fancy PMs. So you just basically created your own PM school within Google.
It was 2002. And what happened was my boss, Jonathan Rosenberg, got hired that spring. And Jonathan wanted to hire kind of classic PMs, having background in product management elsewhere, having MBAs.
Fancy executives.
Just product leaders, not necessarily even executives.
Okay.
And so he was like, wanted to hire product leaders. And he was there for 4 months and he hired 2 people, Pearl and John. They were terrific. They were really good product managers. But in that same time, Wayne Rosing on the engineering side had hired, at that point, I think we were hiring 8 people a week. And this was the year after the Larry and Sergey bucks had really crushed our headcount hiring. And so I was like, we should be hiring at a ratio of like 12-1, and we're hiring at a ratio of like 64-1, right? Like every 8 weeks we get a PM, every 8 weeks we get 64 engineers. So we need more. And John, when he first arrived, got placed on ads, and I think Pearl was helping Susan on partnerships. And I went to Jonathan, I was like, when do I get help on consumer?
Right.
And he was like, when you make revenue, because he's like, product managers should have revenue that they manage. And I was like, but like, if we don't have any consumers coming to the site, like there's no revenue, right? Like you and I think Jonathan was like, no matter, like if there's not a business line to manage, like no PMs. And I was like, can I go fish? And this is funny because it started out as a bet. And I was like, okay, then I want to fish for my own. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I want to bet. He's like, what do you want the bet to be? And I was like, I want to bet you that I can hire inexperienced product managers and train them in the way that works well for Google and Google engineers faster than you can hire experienced ones from the outside. And he was like, I'll take that bet, but what are you going to do? And I was like, don't worry about it. And he was like, no, seriously, like, what are you going to do? Like, I'm going to have to go and defend this to like Wayne and Eric. And I was like, I'm going to go to the best computer science programs in the country. I'm going to look for students who don't just understand the technology and how to code. I'm going to also look for people who really understand how to apply technology and can talk about, okay, if we can see, you know, if you can have a webcam that costs this much, like what can you do with it? If you have a 3D printer that can do this, what can you do with it? Can really see applications of technology. Then I'm going to hire them in, and we're going to put them in roles that are too big because we've got really big PM jobs here that are unmanned. And we're just going to yell at them until they become the product managers that we need them to become. And we'll try and do it with mentoring. There's a guy named Salar Kamangar who started before me at Google, and we were both kind of the 2 junior PMs at the time at Google. And there was a lot of yelling from Larry and Sergey to get us to be the people they needed us to be. And I was like, so I'm hoping to do that with a little bit less yelling. And so formalized the program, hired a guy named Brian Rakowski, who's one of my proudest hires and runs the program today. And we put in place things like management coaching, which is unheard of for new college grads. It was also unheard of at the time to put a new college grad right into a manager role as opposed to having them work for 2 to 4 years before that. But we hired great people and gave them really big opportunities for them to really show their stuff. And boy, did they. I'm really, really proud of that program and all the graduates of it.
You are epic. I stand by the statement. You will
A work in
continue.
progress.
You will continue to be epic. Thank you. Unbelievable. And when this next one becomes something amazing, can we keep talking about how epic that was?
I would love to.
Okay, awesome.
Sunshine and shine, and we are working on it every day. So
I close all these the same. Are you hiring?
we are hiring.
Are there any key roles that you're hiring for?
We are hiring iOS engineers as well as full stack engineers, both new college grads, because I love new college grads and I love the energy they bring, as well as experienced hires. So I'm excited about that. I'm also hiring a chief of staff, but I've got a good one that's interested. So hopefully.
And when you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
Hard work.
Marissa, thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. Thanks for tuning in. Feel free to come back every Monday morning to listen to a new guest, or go back into the archives when we've done more than 100 episodes. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and the episode was edited by Eric Johnson from Lightning Pod. Thank you all.